Hey, what's up, Ant Pads? How's it going today? We are reviewing Grave
can't.
of the Fireflies. Yes.
No. Oh my god. This is why you wanted to intro. That's why you wanted to intro?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
It's the Anime Movie Podcast with your hosts, Kat and Joe.
We're talking one of the most, I believe there was a poll, and it was literally voted the most miserable anime of all time. This is part of Ghibli June. We're talking Grave of the Fireflies. I wasn't joking. We are talking about that movie, despite my extremely high spirits right now. It is a 1993 movie directed by Isao Takahata.
Now, it's a 1988 movie, but it didn't get released in America until 1993.
Tell it to
was
fucking Google. That's what they said. It said the release date's June something, 1993.
June 2nd, 1993 in the US on VHS.
Well, that's the only fucking country that matters.
Right, okay. The theatrical release was originally in 1988, and it was a double bill with Totoro,
Yeah.
which is, sure,
Right.
they're both about kids, but
Yeah.
Jesus.
That's a big bait and switch right there.
Yeah.
What was something like they wouldn't fund Totoro alone, so they were like, hey, make it a double with Grave of the Fireflies. And apparently people in the viewings when Totoro went first, people just would leave before Grave of Fireflies would start.
I believe it.
Or maybe after the very first line of Grave of Fireflies, which is I died on September 21st, 1945. And it's a kid looking at his own dead corpse. So, sorry if that spoiled anything for you, but it's literally the first line of the movie.
Yeah, you can't that can't count as a spoiler. It is
Yeah.
it is literally the first line of the film.
So yeah, if you're looking to be sad and depressed, like I don't really watch a lot of depressing things specifically because I feel that life is already depressing enough, and why would I want my entertainment to be incredibly depressing as well? But when I do watch it, I find ways to cope with it by making fun of literally everything that happens.
Yeah, I noticed.
And this movie is just so hilariously sad and dour, and just anything horrible that can happen does.
It's pretty relentless. And I first watched this film maybe like 12 years ago,
Mhm.
probably now. And I swore I would never watch it again because it made me so angry
Yeah.
about how sad it made me for so long.
Yeah.
It's aggressively sad. And war is, and I think that what's interesting about this film coming out in 88, the other films that were coming out, shortly after were like The Lion King and a couple other Disney films that, dealt with some more sad themes sometimes. I still feel slightly traumatized by Mufasa's death.
Oh,
Sorry, I didn't warn about spoilers.
dude. That fucking wreck. Did I ever tell you the story about that?
No.
So we watched in theaters, and I think that came out in 94-ish, I think. So I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and Mufasa dies, and my dad's sitting next to me, and I'm like crying my eyes out. My dad like turns next to me, and he goes, yeah, his dad's dead.
Oh my God.
And then he goes,
What, in the theater?
in the theater. I'm already crying my eyes out, like loudly.
Uh-huh.
And he goes, yeah, his dad's dead. I'm going to die one day.
What?
My dad's dead, and I miss him a lot. Are you going to miss me? And then I was just like, just fucking
God.
crying.
Do you
my
think that was a
eyes
moment
out.
where he's trying to like teach you to value him or something, or like understand something about life that maybe he thought
Yeah,
you weren't
maybe,
in
or
touch
maybe,
with yet?
maybe he just saw, like, he thought it'd be funny to like see. He was just like
So
devastated.
cruel.
I grew up normal, right? Me laughing hysterically through Grave of Fireflies.
And things like that, and things like Bambi, those are moments that are very sad and will stick with you. And even today you'll find like Twitter posts about Bambi's mom dying or
Mhm.
about Mufasa's death and how sad that is. But the rest of the movie gets really uplifting.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of films that also animated films that bring tears to your eyes, but it doesn't tend to be through grief.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, like you said, there's moments of sadness, like in Bambi when the mom dies, when Mufasa dies in The Lion King. But there's like, how long is this movie? Like an hour and a half.
sounds about right.
I'd say that 45 minutes of it is those moments, just like one after the other. Like, if The Lion King has that one moment of Mufasa dying, this movie has like 74 of those moments. It's just so like the best word, and you already used it, is relentless.
Yeah.
It does not let up.
No, it does not let up. This is based on a novel
Yeah.
that's semi-autobiographical.
Yeah.
And the reason why it's not available on HBO Max is because it wasn't licensed by Disney, because it was under a different licensing company. Basically,
You mean
Isao...
why it's not on Disney Plus?
No, why it's not on HBO Max. HBO Max got all of the
They have a
Ghibli
deal with
films
Disney?
through Disney.
Okay.
Because they own the licensing rights for most of the films that
Mhm,
Studio Ghibli
mhm.
produces. Isao Takahata and Hayao Miyazaki started Studio Ghibli together, and the idea was that they would switch off making films under the same sort of umbrella company.
And then Miyazaki saw this and was like, you take a break, Taka. You got some shit going on. Why don't you sit on the bench for a little bit?
So it kind of makes sense that the films that they were making contemporaneously ended up being sort of a double bill together. But yeah, it's a really odd choice.
Yeah, to be with Totoro. What a
And
double billing.
the author of the novel, the reason why it's semi-autobiographical is he had a little sister, and I believe she died of starvation after one of the atom bombs hit. But this film is based in the port town of Kobe. It's in Kobe steak. You know it? And most of this film is showing napalm bombing. And napalm would land, it would be quiet for a moment, and then it would explode, and then fire would go everywhere. And these Japanese villages were, made of paper and wood, and it just totally took out, entire villages and cities.
I thought that napalm. Oh, maybe it was after World War II. And yeah, never mind. I was thinking of mustard gas.
Oh,
Because
okay.
I was like, I thought that napalm was deemed like illegal to use in war times after World War One, but I think it was after World War II, maybe. But yeah, man, because I was a little confused because there are air raids happening throughout this movie a lot, and when they're dropping the quote unquote like bombs, they don't explode on impact or anything. It just looks like there's fire sticks. And I was like, well, that doesn't seem very useful. But yeah, they do eventually like just wreck shit and burn down entire towns. And
I'll read you a brief thing from. I might come back to this Roger Ebert article because his review has a lot of really great information in it. And this was from March 19th, 2000. But he says, in the waning days of World War II, American bombers dropped napalm canisters on Japanese cities, creating firestorms. These bombs, longer than a tin can, but about as big around, fall to earth, trailing cloth tails that flutter behind them. They are almost a beautiful sight. After they hit, there is a moment's silence, as in they don't, explode on impact. And then they detonate, spraying their surroundings with flames. In a Japanese residential neighborhood made of flimsy wood and paper houses, there is no way to fight these fires.
Yeah, man. Brutal.
It is like the Schindler's List of animation.
See, I haven't seen Schindler's List either. But yeah, it is interesting because I think I should wait until spoilers to talk about that. But
So essentially, as Joe said, we start out with this narration, this voiceover of the main boy is a young teenager named Seita, and
14.
14, and he says the date that he dies, and you see him in a train station, and he's dying of starvation. You see there's other kids who are in there as well, which just sets the scene for it. And then you slowly realize that the narration is coming from his spirit, or sort of his ghost, who's kind of looking back at this time in his life, leading up to
the good times.
yeah, the good times. Oh my god. And I think
memories. Let's relive my death and the death of everyone around me, it seems.
I think one thing that I really enjoyed about this film, watching it this time, enjoy is such a strong word.
Appreciate?
Appreciate, thank you, is some of the visual poetry that goes into this. There are so many sort of visual metaphors and transitions to kind of explain how things are like other things. You know, these sort of visual similes, which is so much of what poetry is, you know, your face is like the sun or whatever, whatever is going on. But you get all of these, like the embers from these fires and things, and the falling bombs look like the lights of fireflies or the lights on a boat. And you get these really beautiful transitions going between those things. And I paid a lot more attention to that stuff this time. And some of it's so well done that I can't hate this movie anymore the way I used to absolutely hate it.
Yeah, it's weird to say like that you like this movie, but I appreciate it and I understand, like, for what it's trying to do, it does it very, very well.
Yeah.
It is, but I can appreciate it and also not want to watch it again. I understand why you were like, I'm never fucking watching this movie again. Like, there's just no joy in it. And there's no joy in it because you know from the very first line of the movie how it ends. And you can't really appreciate the joyful moment. There are like joyful moments and like nostalgia and kids being kids and the triumph of the human spirit, but all of that is taken away because you know how it ends.
Yeah, and the film does that a lot. It jumps around temporally in space. And
corporeal.
And corporeal, sure. Ooh, why not? And sensorially. It does a lot of spoiling itself.
Yeah.
There's a lot. You'll just get a brief moment to sit with, like, wait, what happens? And then you get all of these the film, it lingers a lot, which I think gets slow sometimes. But I think that you need to give space for some of this tragedy to breathe. If there was none of this like space, this processing space, it would just be tragedy after tragedy after tragedy.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that would be better or worse. But it creates this really interesting, I don't know if it kills the suspense or makes the suspense more, because, you know, it's this like Tarantino idea of starting off with this, you know, scene that in the next scene, when we're back to the sort of, you know, a year ago or like 3 months ago, whatever, then there's this constant tension that's like, how do we get to that?
Yeah.
From this, and that actually, instead of killing the suspense as sort of creating a spoiler would, it actually creates more suspense. So I'm curious to talk, and maybe this isn't the point to talk about it, maybe more on the spoilers, about what effect starting the film out like that has on the rest of the film.
Yeah, I was going to say that knowing what's happening and what happens in the end, like Saita, the main character, is dead. It's horror movies talk a lot about like how there is a overwhelming sense of dread throughout a horror movie, and that's what keeps you like, oh, what's going to happen next and what makes it so horrifying. This movie has an overwhelming sense of dread, where you know there's no happy ending, and you're just like, well, how is it going to get worse? And then anything that you can imagine making it worse that could happen happens, and you're just like, geez, like, can we get a breather from this? Can we get a break? Can there be some kind of happiness going on? and there just isn't. Like, and I understand it's an important story to tell, and it's probably one of the. I mean, Roger Ebert. You referenced his article, but like his critique of this movie is referenced everywhere. Like he loves this movie.
Yeah, I mean, he gave it 4 stars.
Yeah.
So this isn't, a 5-star review, but I mean, he essentially says that, this changes what animation is.
Yeah, and he also includes it on like his 100 greatest movies of all time, and like this movie's on loads of lists of like the best animated movies forever, and even like some of the best war movies. But that doesn't make it a happy story. It doesn't make it a fun watch.
Yeah, and Roger Ebert also suggests that animation was the right choice for the film. Apparently, the novel or the story is fairly well known in Japan. But he's like, you're making this in the 80s. Think about watching this with 80s like special effects.
Well, number one, they did eventually make a live action version, I think.
Did they?
They did 2. They
I'll
did
never
one,
watch it.
They did one from the perspective of the aunt, I believe, or the cousin, the aunt's daughter.
Okay.
And then they made another one that's just like this story. But also, apparently, the novel is much more graphic and detailed about like how horrifying everything is. And Takahata was just like, hey, I'll pump the brakes a little bit on this.
A little.
Yeah, a tiny bit. But apparently the novel goes into a lot more detail about the horrors of war and starvation and seeing it happen and just how just truly awful it is.
Did you
thanks, Takahata. I appreciate the a little bit of restraint that you showed.
Did you ever read Hiroshima in school?
No.
Okay. That has a lot of pretty awful details. That was horrifying.
Well, then I'm glad I didn't. Glad I did not read that.
And Farewell to Manzanar, I'm guessing you wouldn't have read either.
No.
Because that's a specifically California book. But the Japanese went through it. And the Japanese Americans went through it in the 1940s and after. We had internment camps in California for Japanese Americans. And Farewell to Manzanar is all about, it's an autobiographical novel about a little girl growing up there and talking about the things that happened to them there and the way that people were just one day running their store in San Francisco and the next day like pulled out of it, store closed and put into internment camps. And it was something they don't talk about in history class. But, I was so grateful that in English class, they had us read these books. And I was like, this has been covered up.
Oh, yeah. Dude, so much of this shit has been covered up in American history. All of the fucked up stuff that we've done.
Yeah.
And I don't want to learn about it.
Oh my God.
I'm just kidding.
But I think this film is kind of, it's slice of life, but it's also...
It's a rotten slice. It's a very rotten slice.
It is a war tragedy drama, and it's kind of neo-realist. There isn't, except for the sort of spirit kind of telling the story as it goes along, that's sort of the only, sort of magical element.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say like that's necessarily magical. I don't know. It's very real and it's very hits hard because you can see this stuff happening. Like it portrays it very, very well. And from what I've read, it's not even scratching the surface of how brutal it can be.
Yeah, absolutely.
So animation, very good. I thought the animation was very nice. We watched it on Cat's bootleg ass Studio Ghibli DVD box set, and even through all of the pixelation, it was still very nice.
It's hard to find to stream, although I just read that it might be on Hulu.
Yeah, we tried to find it on HBO Max. It wasn't there. I Googled if it was on Netflix, and it wasn't on Netflix. We even tried to buy it or rent it on Amazon, and it wasn't on Amazon. So we had to settle for the old bootleg Studio Ghibli box set. And the
But yeah, the rights don't belong to Disney. It belongs to the the publishing company of the novel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought the animation was good. It really, I mean,
Yeah.
there are some parts where like people are dying in it and it looks so sad, and like the people look so haggard and fucked up, and it's like,
Yeah.
damn, they fucking nailed that.
And there's some really beautiful water, like flowing water out of pipes or just the reflections in water. And I'm always amazed with hand-drawn animation, the way they can make it look like something's glowing.
Mm-hmm.
Always amazed by that. That'll never stop amazing me. um, so yeah, I think that the animation is really beautiful in the way that they planned some of those visual similes that are these transitions between shots is absolutely gorgeous. And the way they kind of come in and out of, kind of what's happening in real time and this sort of spirit looking back from the future on what's going on was subtle and interesting and really cool.
Yeah, those transitions were so great. And all the moments with the fireflies when they gather them up and they just have like a firefly party. 1 million fireflies. Or is it 10 million in the song?
I think it's 10 million.
Jesus. Yeah. But yeah, it looks really great and it's very moving. Like I can't really fault any of the animation here. Like it's just great. Apparently there was some kind of unique way that they did it where they used black very sparingly, and instead of black they would use brown to just kind of increase the depression, because apparently like brown is just like a super depressing color.
Really?
Yes, I read that on IMDb's the depression thing that isn't specifically noted, but brown is such a depressing color, even more so than black, I feel.
Interesting.
But yeah, they used black very as little as they could.
Yeah, and I think that throughout the animation, there are moments where, something that could totally be taken out wouldn't really change the narrative of the film at all. But just little reminders all the time of that sense of dread.
Oh yeah.
And they do that really beautifully with, they'll have a close up on a firefly, and you watch the light go out, and then you watch it die and fall off of the wall. And I think it's one of those times that you started laughing, but it's like sometimes it's just like, oh my god, another thing's dying. Okay.
So the reason why they used brown is because the color coordinator said that it was done to give the film a softer feel, and said that until that point it had never been used in anime before, and it was done on a challenge. Because brown is more difficult to use than black because it does not contrast as well as black. So there you go.
Oh, that's less about being depressing.
Yeah, but it said it gives the film a softer feel, which I take as being super depressing.
I think that just means, do you think it...
Personally, I think brown is a super depressing color, and I hate the color brown.
Your phone's brown. Your phone
It's
case.
wooden.
Yeah, brown wood.
Yeah, but I never look at that side. I'm looking at the screen where it's bright and colorful.
Okay.
Voice acting. So we had I think it's the original 1998 English dub.
That's correct, yeah.
And the character Setsuko, who is supposed to be a 4-year-old little girl, was voiced by a woman who is 62 years old. And that presented some problems, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too.
And
I read that she was 5, but 4 and 5 does not matter.
And we're not the only ones that think that was kind of not widely panned, but it was one of the things that people took away from it, being like, that wasn't that great.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't until later that Ghibli films started to be voiced in the English by actual children when there are children involved.
Yeah, and I mean, to contrast it, Saita is supposed to be 14 and he is voiced by a 29-year-old, which, I feel like that gap is easier to bridge as opposed to a 62-year-old voicing a 4 or 5-year-old, So that was kind of rough in parts, but it didn't like Setsuko's voice is kind of annoying.
Yeah.
And she as a character is also a little annoying,
Sure.
but you can't help but feel bad for, like, as annoying as she is, I was still like, oh, come on. Get a win, get a W, something, please.
We can talk more about it in spoilers.
Yeah.
Last thing I think I want to bring up before we move into that is talking about the music
Mm-hmm.
and the sound effects.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the sound effects were pretty decent. I kind of appreciated when there was a bombing and you would hear all this right before the bombing. You'd hear all the noise of the, cicadas. You'd hear whatever else is around. And then you hear the sirens. And then there's the bombing sounds. And then there's like this moment of silence. And then it kind of slowly fades the sound of the world back in.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was so effective.
Yeah. Yeah, I did notice that. And it was one of those big moments of pause to be like, everybody's looking around like, is all of our shit still here? Is everybody still alive? And then it's kind of like the world needs to resume after that. Yeah, I thought the music was pretty good. I mean, maybe there was something going on with the DVD we had, but there were some like really sour notes in the music.
Yeah, I didn't like the music a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very dated, and it reminds me of the music in Nausicaa, which is these very 80s synth sort of vibes. But for Nausicaa, because it's this weird, like, is it like Star Wars and it's really far in the past with this ancient weird technology, or is it really far in the future? And I kind of felt like that sort of synthwave thing worked. But for this film, it was slightly weird for me. And I don't know what I would have preferred.
Like a orchestra instead, like violins instead.
Maybe, but maybe that'd be even more
That'd
tragic.
probably be way more sad
be
too.
Way sadder.
Yeah. Yeah, you're that synth music was the savior.
It might have saved us, yeah. And here I am going, I didn't really like it.
Like, I want it to be more sad. Could you up the sadness with the music, please?
Oh God.
Okay, should we get into this spoiler territory?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's spoil it. Like, this film spoiled my life
Yeah.
for years.
They wouldn't spoil this, right?
Oh,
You
God!
can't spoil this.
Please
Right?
don't.
No spoiler talk. Spoiler talk. Anime movie podcast. Spoiler talk.
Yeah, so here's a conspiracy theory that I'm going to throw out to
Oh,
you.
jeez. Okay.
I think Saita is like cursed, or
It's Seita, by the way.
Saita. Whoops, sorry. I think that he is cursed or is a Shinigami / Grim Reaper type person. They should have sent him to fight America in the war because everyone around this kid dies. Everyone, except
I think everyone. There's so many people in this country that are dying at this time. I think you can't just say that it's
no,
this
it's his
dude.
fault. He's a
Okay.
Shinigami.
Wow.
Hopefully that fucking ant died. That woman fucking sucked.
She definitely like descended into country in this, like, like she started out and it was like it starts out where the aunt sees Satan, like Seita running up to her with Setsuko, and she's like, you need to go see your mother, she's been injured. And I'll take care of Setsuko, like, and
Actually, I don't think that's her. I think that's a family friend that's living in that town.
oh really? I thought it was the same person.
I think I read that their initial interactions with that woman at the beginning of the movie is not the aunt. It is a family friend that lived in their neighborhood.
Well, that would make a lot more sense because that woman seemed to have a heart.
Yeah.
And I was like, what happened to this person who seemed so kindly in the beginning?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm certain that I read it, but I'm not sure if I'm right. But yeah, that woman. So I think what happened was they went to go live with their aunt now that their mom has died, and Seita
Seta.
Okay, Seta had buried like a bunch of food that was apparently super hard to find and brings it over to the aunt's house. And the aunt is like, oh, wow, this is really hard to find food. Like, everybody's having such a hard time here. And you have this whole thing of food that you buried during the air raid. So thank you for bringing it. And we'll all be eating this. And then once that food ran out, she was just kind of like, get the fuck out of here. What are you doing here still?
Well, then she, insisted on him selling his mom's kimonos, and that I think that's the one of the first times where I was just so heartbroken watching this film. 12 years ago is when Setsuko is just like grabbing onto this aunt's arms and begging her not to
Yeah.
like sell these kimonos 'cause it's like the last piece of her mom that she had, and it just like gives me goosebumps to think about. It's like so sad.
That was the first instance where I was like, wow, this aunt is pretty heartless. Like, the mom's been dead for, maybe a week. And they're like, all right, let's sell some of this shit. We got to get some rice.
And then it's Seta's and Setsuko's to sell, and they get a bunch of rice, but the aunt and the aunt's family are the ones who eat most of it. And then she even tells them, like, no, you can't have rice balls. You can just keep eating rice porridge because you're not doing anything for this country. This family who's doing stuff for the country, they can eat that stuff, which you got from selling his dead mom's clothes.
Yeah. And I know that times were different back then and people went to work a lot younger than they do now. But the Saita is 14, and she's like, well, how come you're not at school or working? He's like, well, my school blew up and my work blew up. It's like, what do you want me to do?
And who else is going to take care of his sister?
Exactly.
This woman clearly has no interest.
Yeah, I mean, she complains about the sister crying throughout the night because people have to work the next day, and they're like, get her out of here. She's crying. We have work to do. You lazy bums aren't doing anything. It's like, dude.
Just the empathy of a potato.
I know. It is unreal. And then, like, I wish that there was a follow-up, and maybe if she did survive, to be like, they died of starvation and stuff. Like, how does that make you feel?
Yeah.
Does that make you feel good? You think you could have spared maybe a fucking rice ball now this time?
This film really does a great job of making you hate that woman.
Yeah.
And he hated her enough that, given the opportunity to, suck up his pride and go back to her to try and save his sister, even though his sister meant the world to him, he still couldn't suck it up.
So apparently, this is what I was going to bring up in the spoiler-free thing, but I said I'd save it for the spoiler portion. Apparently, Japanese culture, they all side with his decision to like keep his pride and not go back and swallow his pride and apologize to his aunt.
Right.
And people in the American and like I think it said Australian were like, no, dude, just suck up your pride and go say you're sorry and survive. So there was apparently a big disparity in the opinion on that because
a big rift.
Yeah, and I mean I get both sides.
Yeah, same. I don't know which side I'd be on. I don't think I could handle being treated like that.
I don't think I could handle seeing my little sister as haggard as she is when he's trying to feed her that watermelon. Like, her eyes are all sunken in. I think
Yeah.
maybe at that point I'd be like, okay, Aunt, whatever your name is, I'm sorry. Would you look at the, like, even when he starts bathing her by the lake or whatever, and you just see all the rash on her back, I'd maybe start to talk to an adult, even if it's not the aunt, just any adult in town, which I think he does try to do.
Yeah, and I think, watching it's kind of like, isn't there an orphanage? But you're like, the infrastructure is fucked at this point. Like, and with that aunt, it just amazed me when she said, well, if now you're like talking back to me, when he's like, but that rice is ours.
Yeah.
And it might even be Setsuko who actually says that rice is ours. And she's like, oh, well, now you're blah, 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 blah. And then she's like, well, then we can eat separately and I won't make you food anymore. And then gets annoyed at them for buying a stove.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, they bought a stove to spite me. They're like, no, because they want to eat.
Yeah, you said that
And
you're
you've
not
been
going to cook for them anymore.
And you've been stealing all of their food.
Yeah. Unreal, dude.
it makes me mad.
So the live action version that I talked about earlier, that tells the story from her side or the cousin's side, is mainly about how the war hardened her and made her that way.
Right.
Because she apparently used to be like a good-hearted woman, but after all that tragedy, she was like, you know what, fuck everybody. I'm looking out for me.
And my family
Yeah.
and not my extended family.
Yeah. I just don't know how you could be like that. Like,
And she has one moment of caring, it seems like, when he says, all right, we've obviously overstayed our welcome. We're heading out. And she's like, well, where are you going? For a moment, it seems like she cares.
mhm.
And then he's like, somewhere.
I
And she's
live in
like,
a shack.
all
See
right.
ya. She's like, all right, deuces. Take care.
I feel like before we get into talking about their little sort of shelter in the hillside, I kind of want to go back to the mom.
Okay.
Because we kind of completely skipped over her death.
Yeah.
I think this is another time when
I started cracking up. I started cracking up just because of how sad it was and how fucked up she looked. Because I don't want to say it's a kid. Would you say that this is a kid's movie?
No. I could barely emotionally handle it at the age of 20. So
Yeah. So, but it's in the context of like Ghibli and, you know, your knowledge, you're not you specifically, but the general public's knowledge is like, oh, Studio Ghibli, here's Totoro, and like he's the logo and everything. And then you're thrust into this world of sadness. And the animation doesn't change. Like, it's the same people that were working on My Neighbor Totoro. And apparently they would get confused about which thing they were working on that day and be like, oh shit, yeah, oh, I'm in the depressing world today. So you have that same gleeful, childlike animation, but in this just so miserable world. And then when Seita is brought to his mom, who has been in a horrible fire involved accident, like she's bandaged up from head to toe. Yeah, in a bombing. She's bandaged from head to toe, and like her skin is purple. It's charred and all this.
Yeah, you can see some sort of blood coming through the bandages, and you can see that that
it looks
her
like
lips are purple.
Yeah, it also looks like she lost some fingers too.
Yeah, I mean, while I was watching that this time, I was just like, when you're bandaged, when your body's 90% bandaged, whatever is happening underneath that, I don't think you come back from that in the 1940s.
No,
you know?
yeah. You can barely come back from it now. Like, it's insane.
That'd be a lot of skin grafting, and you wouldn't have any skin of your own to do it.
So I know a grown man now, but I went to high school with him, and he had 90% of he was in an accident, and 90% of his skin was burned. And he survived, luckily, but skin grafts all over. He's blind. It's just like a horrible situation. And that's the situation that Seita's mom is in fucking like 100 years ago. That technology did not exist. But Seita is worried about her heart condition. Like, he sees the charred corpse of his mom, and I know that...
The not quite dead corpse.
I know that fucking... You know, he's just trying to hold it all together, but he looks at the doctor and he's like, she's got a heart condition. Should I get her medicine? And I was just like, oh, God, dude. Like,
but that's such a beautiful moment.
I know.
In the way that whoever is thinking about that understands tragic moments like that.
Yeah, because it doesn't make any sense.
It's that absolute denial of what's going on, but concern, but it's completely out of your control, but you want to do something to help or be in control. So it's like, can I go get her medicine?
Yeah.
With just absolutely not connecting the dots about how serious it is.
Like, I feel like if you're in a moment like that, and luckily I haven't been in any kind of moments like that in my life, but I could see how nothing around you could make sense.
Yeah.
And you're just trying to make sense of it and trying to do what you can. But because of my, I don't know, sense of humor or whatever, when he said, should I get her? She's got a heart condition. I just started cracking up and just being like, bro, she's got a lot more going on right now than her heart condition. This is so brutal.
And I think one thing that this film does really well, amongst all of this tragedy, is it does a lot of things kind of subtly. I mean, the whole thing, again, relentless, and you don't usually combine the words subtle and relentless, in the same sentence. But, they don't really have this moment where somebody comes up to him and is like, son, your mother's dead. Like,
Yeah.
you just see her getting thrown into a pile of other bodies. And you know that that's probably exactly what was happening, just piles and piles of bodies that would be all burnt as one, because there's no time, or there's some of those people don't even have living family members to be able to bury them or honor them, and it's that moment where you're just like, oh, when where body becomes object, instead of subject, where the body loses agency, and it brings into all these like existential questions when you just see person after person being thrown into this pit like bags of rice.
Yeah.
And later there's a callback to that again with one of these sort of visual similes when as Joe mentioned, there's that really beautiful scene where Setsuko's like, I don't want to go into the shelter right now, it's too dark, I can't see anything. And so they catch a bunch of fireflies and release them in the shelter, and the next day a lot of them have died, and Setsuko's making a grave for them, and this is the moment when Seita realizes that Setsuko knows that her mom is dead, because of course the aunt told her.
Yeah, of course.
Because and Seita was trying to keep it from her, but he's keeping it together so well this whole time, even has these moments of contentment, just seems to like be soldiering on. And then seeing her pushing these bugs into this makeshift grave,
it gives him like a flashback to
and you see how
mom.
It looks exactly like the bodies going into this pit.
Yeah.
And I was and it looks a lot like some of those other transitions that they have when they show bombs looking like fireflies or whatever. I love how they use the fireflies when they're lit up to look like certain things, and then in these sort of similes, and then in this moment the dead body without the light, that light going out is such a powerful metaphor, which I think they string through this film really beautifully.
Yeah. And with that moment of subtlety, like with the mom dying too, is like you said, no one tells him that she's dead. You just see her body being carried out, and there's maggots and flies crawling all over the body. She gets chucked into a pit filled with other bodies, and then you just see Saita leave with a box, which is her ashes, we assume.
Yeah.
Maybe, I think I've read somewhere that it was like, it's just bone, maybe a couple bones from her body, but that's it. And then like, you're left to assume that she's dead, but no one specifically comes out and says it, but the only time that you really get confirmation is like once the aunt is talking about the mom and being like, hey, did you go visit your mom? Saita's like, my mom is dead. She died before we even got here. And the aunt is like, well, you're telling me now? Like the aunt has some kind of weird reaction like, well, what the hell? Why didn't you tell anybody? And it's like, dude, he's going through some shit.
And then a second later it's like, well, dinner is around soon.
Yeah.
Like, so, get inside.
Yeah.
It must be his dad's sister. Like that can't be her sister.
It is his dad's sister.
Okay. That makes sense. Oh yeah, because she said that Setsuko and Seita have family in Tokyo that on their mom's side. So can I kind of suggest not her side.
Yeah.
When you were mentioning the maggots and the flies on her body, they do that a few times, and that's kind of their way of showing that this body is dead.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of being reclaimed by nature, whatever. But the first time we see it is when we see Seita in the train station in the very, very first scene, and as soon as he dies, there's a fly that starts to crawl on his skin. But it's that, and I think that's such a sensorial thing where that the tickle of a bug on your face would make you flinch or would make you do something. And it's that moment when not even the eyes, flinch a little bit when the bugs start crawling on the bodies that is, again, such a powerful image.
Yeah. Powerful, subtle.
Yeah.
No one it's so good. And like you brought it up earlier too, is that Saita holds it together for so long in this movie. Like I wrote down like a couple times like Saita yet to cry / break down at all. There's one point where he does a ton of hip circles on a high bar when Setsuko's like bawling her eyes out. And he's like, hey, he's trying to entertain her and like make her feel better. And then he just does like a fuckload of
and then he's like
bar
wandering
tricks
around trying to find little scraps and what he can find in the rubble of people's homes. And he finds a broken pipe and he like washes his face in it. It kind of has like a little like shower moment and is like doot doot doot, like could literally be humming or whistling, like continuing down the street. And I was like, he looks content, and you know that he's his own ticking bomb of emotions. And I'm so glad that they played that up, because for a bit you're just like, this is an unrealistic way to react, and it's like, well, honestly, everybody reacts to tragedy and trauma really differently. And a lot of people are in shock or in denial or are trying to put on a brave face for their little sister. And, it's that great moment with her pushing those dead fireflies into the grave, and, grave of the fireflies, titular moment that actually makes him connect back to that moment, watching his mom being put into that pit. And that's when he bawls his eyes out, and I thought that was really, really powerful.
Well, even in that moment, like, so he's been trying to stay strong for Setsuko the whole movie. And even in that moment when he breaks down, he's still trying to be strong for her, because he's like, she's buried in this really beautiful place. Remember the most beautiful graveyard that back in our neighborhood. She's buried underneath the most beautiful tree there. And then it pans out from that scene to go into their little shelter thing. And you just see the box where the ashes are. And it's like, he's even still trying to be strong in this moment where he's being totally weak. And well, not totally weak, because he's still trying to be strong. But like, once it catches up to him, he's still trying to do it for Setsuko and try to be like emotionally there for her and protect her. But fuck, dude.
Yeah. And again, those little moments of dread that are sprinkled throughout this cruelly but very, very well. There's a moment where you see some like sort of happier times with Setsuko and Seita, and he's trying to teach her how to catch a firefly, and he catches it first, and he kind of passes it off to her, and she accidentally squishes it. This moment where she's like, oh no, and you're like sad and trying to like get it off of herself and all that, and that to me is this little moment of like, oh, this is like a childhood innocence moment, but then like, oh, I've just killed something. And then he gives her a fruit drop, and a little while later she almost chokes on it. So it's just these like little things that he throws in that make you feel like a little bit tense about even like those like happy, nice times, because they almost feel like metaphors for stuff that's going to happen later. And again, it's like this visual poetry.
Yeah. And once they start living in the abandoned bomb shelter thing, the sadness, I feel like, really kicks up, because that's when they're on their own and they're really struggling. They have to make ends meet and get food and cook for themselves. And Setsuko's 4 years old, according to the thing that I read. They're gonna be picky eaters and annoying sometimes, and she's like, I don't want to eat that, and he's like, come on, just eat it, it'll be the best tasting thing, and like, I promise, like a couple months from now we're gonna be eating whatever you want, ice cream and blah blah blah. And it's just like, God. And I think I was holding it together pretty well throughout this movie, but for some reason the thing that really started to like really get to me is when the other kids find their shelter and they start like making fun of it.
Yeah.
That's when it started to really be like, fuck you kids. Like, you don't know how hard Setsuko and Seita have it.
Oh.
You fucking bullies. Like, they weren't even there to hear it, but just knowing that some kids are like making fun of them or looking down on them, it's like, dude, you don't know their lives. Their mom is dead. They got not kicked out, but their aunt is a bitch.
I mean, they almost got kicked out. I feel like they quit before they got fired.
Yeah, they saw the writing on the wall.
Yeah. Yeah, and that scene is the first scene where you find out that Setsuko dies. Because you kind of get the impression if he's on his own and he's dead, that that's probably what happened as well. But, you know, that beginning leaves some hope. It destroys the hope that Seita is going to live. But you get some kind of hope for a bit of it that, like, maybe she'll be okay. Maybe he'll take her to a doctor and the doctor will be like, I want to adopt her. Like, I don't think you can take care of her. And then she goes on to live. And you're like, maybe this is going to be like, maybe things are going to be okay.
Yeah. It's like, I'm telling my brother's story through whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have these kids running around and then they're like, oh, look at this, like, rest in peace at the little grave for the Fireflies, which is really a grave for their mom and for all those people who were dying, just being thrown anonymously into pits. And then, you know, one of them runs over to a patch that has some writing on it and he goes like, well, this one says Setsuko, and then the scene just ends and you're like, wait, you can't just drop that on me like that.
Yeah.
And it does. And then now you have to, like, it's kind of like the beginning all over again, to have this like really sad moment to realize that's what this is leading up to.
Yeah.
You know, and
yeah. I don't know. That got me sad. And then once you see like Setsuko die, and then they have like a montage of her memories and just like playing around in the shelter, that fucking wrecked me on the inside. Like, especially seeing, there's one specific part of it where she has like a cape on and she's running around.
And there's that reflection in the water.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Dude, that hit me so hard right in the feels. Because, you know, I did shit like that. Like, my sister did shit like that.
Yeah.
Just seeing it and then, like, you know, she's dead. It's like, oh, Setsuko, you were voiced very annoyingly, but...
And I think, you know, this is the first time I've watched it dubbed, because when I originally watched it, it was subtitled. And again, I didn't find the voice as annoying. I find a lot of the time that the subtitled versions, the voices sound better to me. Of course, I don't speak the language, so maybe they're really irritating if you speak Japanese. I'm not sure. But even this time, I was like, you know what? I think I could get through this without crying. I know everything that happens. I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong. And I was like, I'm even finding Setsuko pretty annoying right now with like this voice acting. And then still I was like, oh, I can't keep them back.
Yeah.
The tears are coming.
Yeah, dude.
One thing that struck me about this film in terms of, oh, that's what it was like to live at that time. And just thinking about how much technology has changed in the last 80 years. And one of those things was how he knows that he has family on his mom's side in Tokyo. They would probably take him in, especially because they probably don't know she's died. They probably have absolutely no idea. And he says to a few different people who are like, well, can't you reach out to somebody else, or can't you go to somebody else, or you have other family? He's like, yeah, I do in Tokyo, but I don't know how to reach them.
Yeah.
You know, and that's like this really painful irony.
And I mean, the distance between Kobe and Tokyo is roughly 264 miles. So it's not like he can walk there or get there quickly.
Right. And, you know, I wonder if that's why he was in the train station, you know, maybe when, you know, maybe he's just begging in the train station.
Maybe.
But, you know, there's this, like, you don't really see what happens. I think the last, like, chronologically, kind of the last thing that happens is those kids finding that stuff. And they say, like, oh my God, there's a ghost. And I think it's him being really gaunt and starving. But you don't know what happens between him still being in that shelter and him being in the train station.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of left up to your imagination. But we also don't know if that train station is in Kobe. That train station could be
Yeah.
Tokyo. He might have like made it to Tokyo and then like died in the train station.
That would have been even more sad. Cat, way to make it even more sad. He's so close to his destination. He just didn't have it. I know that at the beginning of the movie, somebody says like, "Oh, the American soldiers are going to be here soon. We can't have these fucking gaunt, starving kids here. This is going to look like shit for us."
Yeah.
Cruel, cruel world. I did enjoy, and I thought that this was like really smart. When people were hiding in the air raids, Seta was running into their houses and stealing all their shit.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
There's those
go
great,
fucking Seta, go.
yeah, great scenes of everybody running one direction away from the bombs, and him running directly into it. 'Cause it's
Yeah.
like, oh, and you know what? In some ways, that was keeping him alive,
Absolutely.
and it was the fact that
It was his only option.
yeah, and the fact that the Japanese surrendered at some point.
Uh-huh.
He was almost crestfallen because he knew that he wasn't going to be able to survive anymore because he was surviving off of the fact that these bombings were taking place in, again, an irony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when he finds out that they surrendered and lost the war, and like you said that maybe there was some hope for Seta if you're just watching this for the first time. I knew
Oh,
going
you mean
in,
Setsuko?
oh, Setsuki, yeah. Going into this because you told me how sad it was, I was like, I have no hope for anyone in this movie. So that may have been like I was just like, yeah, everyone's going to die. Like as soon as he said that he has a dad in the Navy, I was like, his dad's dead. His mom dies like initially, you know that he's dead. And then Setsuko, there's no way that she was going to survive a 4-year-old on her own. I was like, there's no fucking way. I don't care who takes her and she's dead. But apparently, so here's a fun fact, as fun as it can get with this movie. According to the movie, their dad was a captain on a Japanese Navy who served aboard the Maya, a heavy cruiser which participated in a number of naval engagements during World War II. During the Battle of Leyte, Leyte, Leyte Gulf, the Maya was torpedoed by an American submarine and sank and lost 473 men, including the ship's captain.
Wow.
So
how do they know that he was on that? Did they say that he was on that ship during
yeah,
the
it
film?
says it
Okay.
according to the movie.
So that's kind of like inside baseball.
Yeah,
so
super,
I guess maybe a Japanese audience would recognize that. That might have been
possibly. Apparently, the ship's name is derived from Mount Maya, a mountain located near the city of Kobe, where the movie takes place.
okay.
So that is some like inside baseball and a nice little Easter egg, I guess, for all you Easter egg hunters with Grave of Fireflies.
Sounds too pleasant. Oh gosh.
That is a nice little detail to include that, though. To be like, hey, my dad was on this ship, and that.
Yeah, and again, the subtlety.
Yeah.
Not, it's not like somebody goes, "Oh, you mean that ship that sank?" and blah blah blah. And there's, like you'd never have any of that kind of exposition in this, which I think, for how tragic it is and the drama of it lends that neo-realist feel to it that it feels so human. It feels semi-autobiographical. It doesn't feel like somebody just wrote this from their imagination. There's just too much detail. There's too many levels of sadness. Like just those moments with Setsuko, like sucking on a marble when she's just kind of losing it and definitely dying.
Yeah.
And him pulling that out of her mouth. And then he keeps the tin that had the fruit drops with him. And then the moment where the guard discovers that he's dead and is like, "What is this?" Sees the like rusted tin and just fucking tosses it,
Yeah.
Out into this field. And you're like, I understand the ironic significance of that, but of course that guy would do that. And the moment in the doctor's office where he's like, "What can you do for her? Can you give her a shot? Can you give her medicine?" And he's like, "She needs food."
Yeah.
And then he's like, where am I supposed to find food? And he's like, leave my office. I have
Yeah.
my next patient, you know? And it's just so heartbreaking.
Yeah, dude. Apparently, also, once Setsuko's dead, he puts some of her ashes into that little tin, and along with the picture of his dad that he carried around with him, it's just like, dude. Like words can't even express like how sad that kid's life. Like he was the last survivor, and he knew he was, and he knew how fucked he was, because after he finds out that they surrendered and they lost the war, the guy also was kind of like, oh, he's like, well, what about the Navy? And the guy's like, oh, they're all dead. Like all their ships are sunk. They're all at the bottom of the sea. And he's like, well, what about my dad's ship? And the guy's like, I don't fucking know. And he like throws him off of him. It's just like the world just beat this kid down so much. And so he leaves. He's looking at the picture of his dad. And you see that another moment of him like breaking where he says like, Daddy. And he's just like, all right, so mom's dead. Dad's dead. We're on our own. We got to figure it out. And I think that's before he finds out that Setsuko's dead. So he goes back, and then Setsuko dies, and he's just like, what am I doing? What am I doing now? I guess I'll go on a train. I don't know.
A long time ago when we did the intro episode for this, I talked about Grave of the Fireflies briefly, and I also talked about a film that it reminds me of. It's a live action film from 2004, I believe, called Nobody's Home.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's the English translation of it. But it's also based off of a real story. And it is similarly lingering
Mm-hmm.
and similarly so relentlessly tragic. It's the only film that gives me a very similar feeling to watching this. And it's also about kids who are too young trying to take care of each other when they've been abandoned in some way, and watching things start to go wrong and go badly, and having no way to help, and watching nobody step in to help, and again having that, like watching a sibling, become consumed with guilt about the death they feel is their fault, and it never should have been their responsibility. And oh god, there's something about that just pulls at the heartstrings, and Japanese cinema does it so well.
Yeah, I hate movies like this. I think the people that make them are evil. Like legitimately, like this movie, it's literally created to make you feel horrible.
But I think that it's really important to give you an idea of what people actually experience during times that we would like to avoid in future. And I think that some of our grandparents are alive and old enough to remember World War II, and they might not have been on the battlefield, and it was difficult in America, and there was not a lot happening in America as far as like war. There was no front line in the US, but a small island like Japan, you couldn't get away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And the number of people who had nothing to do with it, didn't want to be allied with the Germans, didn't want to help Hitler with his cause. Like they just wanted to like have a rice paddy and make rice balls and enjoy childhoods,
Yeah.
And I think that you need stuff like this. You need stuff like Farewell to Manzanar and like Hiroshima. You need literature and movies so that people can actually feel and empathize with some of these events instead of just seeing it as history. With history, it's a list of events, and they also leave out a lot of things. And they can say, oh, it was a tragic thing, and they give you statistics about the number of people who died, and you can't understand those numbers. You can't empathize those. It dehumanizes all of it. And I think that things like this rehumanize it. And I hated this movie for a long time because of how deeply sad it made me constantly while watching it. It made me angry, but on second viewing, while I will not watch it again anytime soon, maybe in another 12 years, I do feel it's really important.
Yeah. I still think that people are evil that make them. I understand the significance and importance, but they're sick people. For wanting to make me feel that way.
All right.
Anything else you want to bring up before amp cranking?
Let me make sure that I'm not missing any of the things that I... Oh, yes. There is absolutely something that I want to bring up, because this I did not remember from my initial viewing.
Mm-hmm.
We need to talk about the last shot of this film.
Okay.
What it looks like is, throughout this film, sort of the spirit of Seita has been leading the spirit of Setsuko, through their memories and also through this sort of path that's lit up by fireflies. And they seem to be on their way somewhere. And you're kind of thinking, like, maybe they're on their way to heaven, or, whatever this idea is of beyond life or afterlife. Maybe they're on to get reincarnated, whatever. But they make it at the end to a bench on a hill, and you're kind of in a slightly forested area, and the camera slowly comes up from, being down and looking up to the hill, so you can only see the sky. And as it raises up and you start to get level with them on the bench, you start to see that there's a city in front of them, but like skyscrapers. It looks like a modern city. And my idea watching it now was, first of all, how did I not remember this? This is fascinating. But that was like late 80s, maybe Tokyo or something, maybe Kobe. But it's a modern city that they're now looking at, which made me think, like, are they haunting this place, or is it saying, like, Japan needs to always remember, like, this stuff happened here, the spirits of this are all around us. Every time you see fireflies, you should remember the spirits of all these people who gave their lives.
I think it's like that, where it's like that history is always going to be there.
Yeah.
And not necessarily like haunting, but just like it's there. This is our history, and don't forget about it, because like fucked up shit happened. I was literally, that pause there was me trying to think of a more eloquent way to put that.
But then you just,
but my dude brain just
doubled
was
down.
Like, fucked up shit happened,
And again, a really beautiful visual, poetic metaphor to end the film.
Yeah. I wish I would have saw it now. I think I was writing Seita as a Shinigami in my notebook at the time.
But I thought that ending was perfect.
No, yeah. The way that you described it sounded very nice. All right. You crank that amp first.
Okay. So I have a long history with this film, in a sense. I have some beef with it. But I realize now that it's just because of how it made me feel, and the fact that it was able to make me feel like that. It drew me in so much, and every part of this film broke my heart. I think the first time I watched it, I sobbed almost nonstop throughout this film. I remember I was having a bad day and I was a little sad, and I was like, I'm going to watch that Studio well, I was literally like, I'm going to watch that one Studio Ghibli film in the box set that I have that I haven't seen yet. Grave of the Fireflies. and then I couldn't stop crying. I was so devastated. But I'm really glad that we revisited this. And so much of the animation is so, so beautiful. So I have to give this an 8.5.
An 8.5 out of 11. Yeah. So if you know how we do this podcast, we have tournaments to determine which movie we watch, and we were not looking forward to watching this. Like, it wasn't in our plan. We were originally supposed to do a different movie today, but some plans got fell through, and we ended up watching. We ended up doing a Ghibli tournament, and Grave of the Fireflies was kind of just thrown in there, and I think both of us were dreading it winning it, but it won the tournament, and we were both like, "Oh, okay." Like, we'd been avoiding this one for so long, but this is going to surprise some people. But I am going to give this an 11 out of 11.
Oh my God. Now I feel like shit. I feel like I should have given it an 11.
No, it's just, look, I understand what it's trying to do. And what it's trying to do, it nails it. Like,
Yeah.
if it's trying to show you a very tragic, realistic type of story of what people went through in World War II in Japan, and like how fucking sad it can be. And it's not like this is an isolated incident. Like, it just happened to these two fictional characters or whatever. Like, that was happening all over the place. And it really shows the horrors of war. And I think it does it very, very well. And it made me feel.
Oh.
So yeah, I gave it an 11 out of 11. But how it makes me feel on the inside, I give it a 1 out of 11. And rewatchability, I'll give it a 1 out of 11. But I'm glad that, we watched it, because I probably would have never watched it. But yeah, I don't think I need to do it again anytime soon. But I get it. It's sad. Good job, Ghibli.
Good job, Takahata.
Yeah.
You broke my fucking heart.
Yeah.
Over and over and
Get
over
some therapy,
again.
because now I need some therapy. Thank you. So that'll do it for Grave of the Fireflies. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to our podcast, rate and review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We post clips and the whole podcast on the YouTube channel. Follow us on Instagram at the Anime Movie Podcast. And if you have any questions or want to write in, the Anime Movie Podcast at gmail.com is the way to do that, or just slide into the DMs of the Instagram page. And that will do it. Thanks for listening. See ya.
Bye. You son of a bitch.
Thanks for listening to the Anime Movie Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram at the Anime Movie Podcast, and you can reach out via email at theanimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and tell a friend. Thanks. Have a good one. Bye.